Hey everyone, thank you for joining us today. My name is Doug with B&H here, and it's a wonderful Monday morning. I haven't been in the hot seat in a while, so I'm kind of getting back into the groove of things. We have a lot to talk about today. This was just announced, the Canon Cinema EOS C80. You can see right next to it is the C400, announced just a few months ago. We have kind of a whole ecosystem of sorts to talk about today, so we're going to try to get to it as quickly as possible. We have a wonderful panel with us today. We have both Zak and Paul. Why don't you introduce yourselves, and then we'll just jump right into it.
Hi, thank you very much for having me. My name is Zak Noyle. I'm a Canon Explorer of Light based out of Hawaii, specialize in water and surf photography and cinematography.
Very cool. I'm sure you got some like amazing images with that then. In that
It
case.
is an incredible camera and piece of equipment. I'm really excited to share some of that content I got with you guys and talk about some of my favorite features.
Cool, cool.
Nice.
Paul, nice to see you again.
Hey, good to see you. I'm Paul Hawxhurst. I am a senior technical representative with Canon USA. I am based in New York City, so I get to come down here all the time and hang out. But I am super excited to talk about both of these cameras. It's just a crazy summer for us, so.
Yeah, you guys have been busy this year.
Yeah.
Especially this summer, though. Needless to say, there's a lot of surprises here. I was kind of surprised to learn about the C80 in general, especially right after the C400. But let's just get into some intro talking points. So for those who are just getting used to these cameras, who haven't even really heard much about them, or if you just want a refresher, let's go over some of the key specs. We have a 6K full-frame sensor in both. That, of course, includes a triple base ISO of 800, 3200, and 12,800, which is really great to see. Big one here for the C80 is the 12G SDI port. Looking more specifically at the C80, of course, redesigned hinge. We have an RJ45 connector, locking mechanism on the back, multifunction shoe, and a new joystick. So yeah, there's a lot of.
It's a lot.
Just that's just to get you guys ready for what's to come. So let's just start right here with full frame. I think we have to jump right into that. Full frame is, of course, I feel like it's more of an industry trend in general, but to see it here in both of these cameras relatively close together is really interesting. What do you think the thought process was in terms of, I guess, product positioning and where you see the Cinema EOS lineup growing from here?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it all really kind of starts with the RF mount, right?
Makes sense.
First bringing, the C70 was the first camera that brought the RF mount into the Cinema EOS. And really, we've kind of solidified it now by having both the C400 and now the C80, which has not only the RF mount, but also those full frame sensors. And it's saying, like, here we go. We have, like, almost a complete lineup, just boom, in 2 cameras, ready to go. And it's another thing. It's like previously with the C70, right? The C70 was kind of like a mini C300 Mark III.
Right.
And so a lot of people made that comparison. A lot of people bought C70s as B and C cameras to their C300s. The same kind of mindset can be kind of applied in this regard as well. The C80 uses the same sensor that the C400 does. All right. It has a lot of those similar specs. Your color and your look and everything is going to match very, very easily between the two. So again, you can also play that game again with these 2 cameras.
Very interesting. It's interesting to me, especially because full frame was previously reserved for the C500 and 700, respectively, I think.
Yep.
I guess what does the lineup look like now if we're going to take that comparison of 300 Mark III to C70 and 400 to 80 are, that's the one outliner with the EF still, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. All right, so I guess let's just get right back into the use of it. Zak, how was your time with the C80?
It's an incredible piece of equipment,
Yeah.
and to me, why would I not want full frame? Why would I not want that full sensor to be able to utilize and shoot on when I'm using Canon glass?
What is your typical setup, and was this at all, like, were you in the Cinema EOS space beforehand?
And that's funny. I was talking with Paul a little bit before this, and the R5, the Canon R5, introduced me into cinematography and videography. And from there, it's just grown and ballooned for my passion. And from going from like almost 95% photography to 95% cinematography now, it was a natural progression to go with this. I still love my R5, but having this that is just that next level up is incredible for me as a tool to be able to utilize.
Nothing really beats a dedicated video camera or cinema camera.
Absolutely.
What specific, though, to, I guess, the C80 did you feel? Well, you did say full frame, but is there anything, like, functionally speaking, that you think was open to you now that once you got your hands on this?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think one of the things that I never had, especially with the R5, is a built-in ND. And I know that's a piece that is coming, a feature from the 70 over to the C80.
Right.
But holy cow, that was incredible. The ease of use, we almost abused it a few times in the thing when we were learning, because we had it for 2 days, and then we had to jump into shooting with it. And from going with no experience with the C70 prior into this, we almost were like, hey, that's so easy. But we had to remember, take your ISO down, change your aperture, all of those type of things before we got to that like ND.
Right.
But that ease of use was incredible. It needs to be a must in a camera.
And it is. Like, I think NDs, you know, when I started with C70 just a few years ago, that was kind of a game changer for me, because the form factor of this camera is really uniquely its own thing.
Yeah.
But it manages to pack in that very essential part of the toolkit. But what's refreshing here, though, is that Canon didn't really change the form factor much, with the exception of one thing, the SDI port.
Yeah.
I think we have to get to that, because that was kind of...
I agree.
That was almost like my wish list thing.
I think for a lot of people, that's the big
yeah.
one, right?
Yeah.
I
loved it.
So...
So, all right, going back to the sensor, though, because really that's kind of at the heart of this is, and also what separates from the C70 a lot, not just in the full-frame nature of it, it's a triple base ISO, which is, I think, a pretty new concept, but also very different from the DGO that we saw in the C70. So, Paul, would you be able to give a little clarification on like the differences between those approaches?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and it's going to be interesting. It's a kind of a lot to wade through when you're looking at comparing the two. You know, DGO was a sensor designed specifically to enhance the dynamic range, to lower the noise, all across one base ISO for the camera. And I thought it did that really well as well. But one of the things for that is the difficulty in the engineering that was that you would actually have a kind of a slower sensor output from that. So it didn't handle rolling shutter as well as it could have in that size sensor. And also, expanding that up to a full-frame sensor is extremely, extremely difficult. So it's actually kind of really cool. Canon went back to the drawing board a little bit and decided to go with these back-illuminated stack sensor. It gives us, you know, these options for the multiple base ISOs, but also for a much faster readout speed of these sensors. So we're getting full-frame sensors that read out faster than the Super 35 sensors with DGO.
Wow.
So that's really, really important when you're shooting things like LEDs or your walls or projection and that kind of thing. You want those faster readout speeds for the sensors. But with the triple base ISO, is something that I really got into. I'm really all about this triple base ISO, especially because I spent a lot of time studying it and how to use it. But it gives you so many options. You know, with the previous sensors, you had one base ISO, and as you ramped up through, that's what you're dealing with. As you ramped up your ISO, you're introducing more noise. Your noise floor was changing, everything like that. If you went down in ISO, you're shifting your dynamic range and everything like that. For the triple base ISO, I can now change my base. I can leverage my ISO, leverage my dynamic range within those ISOs to significantly clean up my image. So I can be like, I really want to shoot at 1600 ISO, right? But I can get that to be as clean as like a 400 ISO by utilizing 3200 base ISO, shifting down. You know, I sacrifice a stop in my highlights, right? But I gain that back in my shadows. I gain that back in my noise floor. And so I'm just able to creatively utilize all these different bases to decide how much sensitivity and how clean I want my image to be. So it's actually extremely versatile, and it gives you more options than the DGO sensor even did.
Yeah, that was one thing I guess you could say I was missing it sort of from the C70, was that approach of being able to select where your noise floor resides and then either going up or down from there and like wiggling your dynamic range essentially into where you need it to be.
Exactly.
Especially these days, I notice a lot of cinematography trends, very, very subtle shadow gradations. So pushing all that DR into the shadow range could be very useful. One thing I noticed with both of these is we have a whole new set of codecs on board. And without getting too into the technical weeds of it, because I know we can spend forever on that, I guess, was there kind of a thinking of unifying them across the board? Because I noticed, and I don't want to stray too off topic, but I noticed they're also in some of the new still bodies.
Yeah, and I think you can see what's going on there, right? So they introduced in the C400, we have the XF AVCS and the XF HEVCS as well as those two new codecs. And the big thing about those is that now metadata and file naming structure is shared between the RAW, the XF-AVC, the XF-AVCS, and the XF-HEVCS all share the same structures in terms of your file name and your metadata, right? But by settling on that and choosing that as our kind of main options, we now unify not only the C80, but also, like you said, the R5 Mark II and the R1 as well.
Right.
Also to utilize those for video. So now you're just simplifying that workflow if you're combining all these different cameras together, and hopefully going into the future that remains as well. It's dealing with like MP4 files that have crazy file names and trying to get that into your workflow of RAWs that have
it can be a nightmare, I know.
It can be a little pain, and so this is just simplifies things.
Very cool. That actually kind of brings me back to about the workflow when it came to post.
Well,
because there's a lot of stuff you can capture with it, and it's multiple formats.
Absolutely, and being able to utilize the RAW, I want the most flat raw file that I can utilize so that I can then push that latitude, I can push that color, I can get it to where I need to be in order to deliver the product I need or what I've envisioned from that. And it was incredible utilizing that. From going from the R5 to these files, night and day, and I love the R5. I'm not trying to say that. I'm just saying that the amount of data within the color that I was able to push.
What was what was the first shot, or maybe just any particular shot that like you brought it in post and you brought it up way beyond what you expected to?
Yeah. We shot some amazing fire knife dancing in Hawaii. And what I wanted to, when they came to me, they said, got this great new camera coming out. What do you want to do? And I said, what are a few of the major features? And when I heard, the triple base, the full frame, the 6K, I was like, I want to shoot real low light of fire knife dancing, and I want to be able to highlight, literally, that dynamic range. I want to be able to show the detail still within those flames, as well as when that blue hour kind of comes into it, I want to be able to show that shift, because this is incredible what I'm able to hold of that data in that dynamic range. And so that was a big thing to me, to be able to push and show those highlights being held within that.
That's awesome. And what about in terms of autofocus performance? Because we have a whole new system to talk about here.
Holy cow. I mean, that autofocus is insane. It's scary good, and I always equate it. I felt like I was cheating when I was using the R5, and I'm like, damn it, I don't feel like, but you don't have to be a professional if you put your face up to it.
Right.
But it almost felt like a little cheating, because I had a good friend of mine, John Lawrence from Canon, and he's like, pull it away from your face and look around what's going on compositionally. Because we were always so stuck looking with the 85 or different things. And when you pulled it away, you're now seeing, oh, wait, if I compose it differently. And the same thing is going with this. Because now with this autofocus, we use a lot of the CNRs, the Sumiri primes to shoot our piece and the different things. I just love the cinema glass and having that control. But there was a point where we're shooting some horseback riding, some cowboys at Kualoa Ranch. And I was like, wait, we're using the 24-105 2.8, beautiful lens.
Oh, yeah.
Let's throw that on animal tracking and see what happens off of a UTV, like a ATV with a full car rig. It was scary good. We had that tracking the animals so precise and quick. I didn't lose a shot. It was more how quickly could I keep up with the gimbal and controlling the remote.
Right.
I was the problem versus the camera, which is a good problem to have.
Yeah, for sure. We want the tools to be a little better than us.
Absolutely.
That lens has now become my absolute go-to, and I really can't stress that enough for anyone watching. Is just the dual pixel autofocus 2 plus the 24-105 f2.8 USMZ.
Yes.
I believe is the name. That with the zoom rocker is pretty game-changing. But let's actually talk a little deeper on that, though. So, Paul, maybe you can shed a little light on the dual-pixel autofocus 2. I guess how does it differ technologically from the original version?
I think I just started out saying, like, if you look back to the C70 and people's general response to the C70, I think the number one kind of like negative point that you would gather from that was the autofocus, right? And so this new autofocus, the dual pixel autofocus 2, is just light years beyond the original C70 autofocus. So if you're out there and you're like, oh, autofocus is my C70, this new one, woof, it's going to blow you away. But really, that's, again, that new sensor, that back illuminated stack sensor. That's what allows us now to utilize that. Before, we were stuck to that 80% of the sensor.
Right.
Now we can go a whole 100% of the sensor for autofocus, all that like that. Also, just, I mean, I don't want to go too deep into the nerd stuff here, but that back illuminated sensor allows us to use the full field of view of each micro lens of every diode on the sensor. And that's kind of, so that means you're increasing the sensitivity of every diode on that sensor. And that's kind of what allows us to really unlock these new levels of autofocus. But like you said, and that's not just, head and eye tracking anymore. Now it's full body tracking. It's, memorizing of people's, heads. It's the animal tracking, like you say. I call it, they say it's dog and cats, but I say it's the four-legged tracking. So it seems to capture more than just the dogs and the cats as your experience with the horses,
with the horse.
right?
It was. I mean, it was crazy because we actually put it on, and then it was going so well. It was on the horse versus the person's face, obviously, because we were in animal tracking.
Right.
To almost where it was frustrating because I forgot I had it in there, and I was like, "It's right there. I want the," And so there was a few frustrating moments, and they're like, "Damn, it is too good. Couldn't trick it."
I've done that before. I've left it on and grabbed animals as opposed to people, and I'm like, wait, what? Oh, it's doing its job. It's okay. Right. Where was I going with this? When we were doing the C400 video, I know exactly what you mean by the 100% coverage, because we kind of tested this. We created a situation where we'd have someone walk to the absolute edge of the frame. Yeah. They would basically be off camera, and we would do a pan and have the camera. I would see it in the screen. It would immediately catch. It would identify the face. Identified it probably a little bit faster than that I actually did the focus, but the fact that it identified it meant that the processing under the hood is really doing its job. Yeah. And that was just fantastic to see. And absolutely. I think we kept things a little slower anyway because we wanted to give it a slightly more rack focus type of look. Yeah. I love being able to customize it for that reason alone.
Just one thing I actually want to say, we talk about rack focusing. The C80 has a kind of a unique thing with its autofocus where it's actually I describe it, but it's like kind of a manual tracking autofocus. And so it can be tracking one subject, and then you can, using the focus ring on your lens, rack that focus, and as it gets to another subject that's capable of being tracked, it will kind of take over for you and track that. Cow. So you can still exist in a manual focus environment, but if you're using these RF lenses, you can manually focus, but if you got people in that frames, it will go back and forth and allow you to control the rack focus instead of having the autofocus system do that rack for you. So
I'm going to take you on all my shoots. I need you. Where were you when I was shooting? That's insane.
I'll go spend some time on Lani Kai. Sure.
That is an incredible feature, one that I could definitely use, and it's, wow, that blows my mind.
Yeah, just give it a shot.
Yeah.
Just as an aside, you kind of answered this off camera before, but you didn't have access to an underwater enclosure, correct?
I did not. Unfortunately, did not have time to get one. We had it several weeks ago.
Right.
2 days prior to the shoot and really just getting it prepped, so no one saw it outside of our production, and we didn't have time to build one. Those could take months sometimes to build. Use a lot of the Aquatech housings, which you guys have here at B&H, and are incredible. That's what I use for my R5 as well as my R3, and they're awesome, but it's a little more custom to build. Something like this will take a little time.
We'll see in a few months' time, hopefully.
Hopefully, because that auto tracking.
That kind of brings me back really quickly to this SDI port. This is probably one of the only things that kind of changes the outright physicality of it. And I don't want to say that as a negative. I think it's a much needed and requested update. So I'm super happy to see it. Let's talk a little bit though about the body changes in general, because there are some that are a little more subtle than others.
Yeah, so actually dimension-wise, the depth and the width are exactly the same as the C70.
Right.
It's the height that changes. So it's kind of 0.3 inches taller And again, one thing you talked about the SDI sticking out. That's one of them. But also, the ND filters are now full frame size ND filters.
That makes sense, yeah.
And so there needs to be a little bit more room for that ND filter system to get those in and out compared to the C70. So that's why it's a little bit taller.
Right. It's kind of miraculous that it fits in there.
Yeah, I know.
Like as a mechanical thing.
Yeah.
There is a new, just so we can go over it, because I know these can sort of be little pain points for C70 users. The hinge has been redesigned entirely. There's a locking mechanism on the LCD screen. Actually, if you can hand me, I can demo it really quick.
Yes.
Pass it on down.
It's very similar for those who have used the C70. SDI port's right here. Basically, the hinge is completely redesigned. It's
wonderful.
much more sturdy than it was before. And then over here, there's a little mechanism to lock it in place, so you can hear the snap, and it works in either orientation. So really nice to see there, and good for rugged run and gun use. Did you use the hot shoe at all, the multifunction shoe, in any way?
I did not.
Thank you. Gotcha.
When we were shooting. But, I think one of the incredible things about that is it's great for one-man band all the way up to a larger production. And we could use it from 1, 4, up to 15, 20-person set, as you can see in some of the production that we did. And that's what's incredible about it. I can operate it solo with the great autofocus and all those features on that, or even larger with multicam. And so it's really versatile.
Speaking of multi-camera, there's actually some new stuff in both of these cameras when it comes to multi-camera. I first heard about it with the 400, and there's definitely more I/O on the 400 to get the job done with this. But I believe with the RJ45 port, there's some multi-camera control, is there not?
Yeah, so both cameras have our XC protocol system. So that's kind of our great unification control protocol. And we've had it in the C300 Mark III, the C500 Mark II, C70, and these two cameras now, the XF605, and all of our PTZ cameras use this. And it's our IP-based control system. And it allows you to basically, over a single network from one source, you can control all the menus of our cameras, you control a whole bunch of functions of our cameras, all from that one source. We make a controller for it that controls our PTCs. The RCIP 1000 is called, and also RCIP 100. Those controllers, you can control these as well with those controllers. We have apps. The Canon Multi-Camera Control app, MCCA, which is an iPhone app, using the built-in Wi-Fi on this now. So another big thing to talk about, right? The C70 did not have Wi-Fi built in, and it did not have Ethernet built in. Now on the C80, we have Wi-Fi built in and that full-size Ethernet port built in. You don't need to use a dongle anymore for those. But yeah, so you can have all these cameras all over like a single network, all controlled from one source. And you're really talking about your live productions, your house of worship, that kind of thing. Anytime that people use those multi-camera shoots, it's a huge thing for them.
Just wanted to talk a couple of questions we were getting. So raw output, I know there's a whole slew of raw recording options internally, which we can definitely address at the same time.
Yeah.
Is there any external by any chance?
So on the C80, yes, there will be HDMI raw output.
Excellent.
Yeah. So, and it's up to still getting the final specs from like Atomos to make sure that it matches up with them. But yeah.
That's good to know, though. Internally, we have 6K raw on both. There's some subtle differences there. Could you go into it a little bit?
Yeah, and actually these are kind of where the biggest differences are.
That's what I figured.
That is going to be the raw recording. Again, because we want the SD cards on the C80, you're limited by that read-write speed of those SD cards, right? And it's kind of tops off at about like 680 megabits per second. You can't, so anything above that, you can't sustain read-write, on SD cards. And so for the raw on the C80, you're looking at your full frame 6K up to 30p in our Cinema Raw Light LT, right? If you crop down to the Super 35 mode, you can get up to 60p in 4K.
Gotcha.
Again, and that's also the LT mode of our Cinema Raw Light to those SD cards. On the C400, you have a lot more options there. You got 6K full frame up to 60p. And you can go up to the raw ST mode. if you remember right, Cinema Raw Light has the HQ, the ST, and the LT modes.
Right.
So you can do that in ST mode. You go down to 30 in 6K. You can get up to the HQ mode on that, and that's all thanks to the CF Express card on that camera. And then you can get up to 4K to 120 Cinema Raw Light on the C400s, and 2K up to 180 as well. And that's all in RAW. And then you can do the 4K 120 and 2K 180 on the C80, but you won't be in RAW. You're going to be in your codec.
Just one more clarification on the 4K 60. Is it full frame or is it only Super 35? I think it's just for the RAW that it's Super 35, right?
Yeah, just for the RAW. You can shoot
RAW.
full frame 4K up to 120.
That's what I thought.
On
okay.
the but
Amazing.
not in RAW. In RAW, it's per pixel, so you're cropping into the actual resolution size. So it's actually more like 4363 if I remember correctly.
Right.
So it's like a 4.3K for
Now,
that.
you had a lot of fun with slow motion, didn't you?
I did. Had a great time.
And did you have any trouble, I guess, this is more of a lighting question, but did you have trouble with strobing lights at all, or flicker is what I mean to say?
No, we didn't
good.
have a problem with that.
And autofocus?
Nope, autofocus was fantastic in that sense. We use a lot of the 4K 120, I believe, during the day. So
Right.
we weren't really shooting that super slow motion in the evening. We shot a little bit of the fire dancing with that, but it was fantastic. No banding, no flicker,
Amazing.
anything
Amazing.
at all. We did use external lights as well, just to enhance, give a little light on their faces and just kind of accentuate the moment versus just the fire. But it was fantastic, and we had no flickering or no problem.
That's awesome.
Not what we didn't want, We wanted that little fire flicker
Of course.
to a degree, but very controlled.
The natural kind.
Absolutely.
Right. You kind of hinted at this off camera before, but you didn't really have to dive into the higher ISO range for those segments, right?
No, and we didn't want. We wanted to kind of hold it at like a great ISO versus going too high. Really wanted to control not having any of like the grain or any type of things like that going very high, and that's why bringing in like the additional lights and then doing that, I wanted to hold those blacks. I wanted to hold the highlights
Yes.
within the fire,
Yes.
and I didn't want to kind of blow it out. It's so easy when you're shooting fire or something bright like that to be like, okay, well, like I gotta raise up my ISO. It's dark. But then you're going to be losing that quality, and I wanted to really control that quality very low.
Very nice, very nice. I ask mainly because I know that when you start to push those frame rates up, you're obviously cutting light in the process, especially if you're keeping a fixed 180-degree shutter.
Absolutely.
And so having that flexibility, I just figured it was worth mentioning. But good to know that you had the extra lights to help you out.
Absolutely. Necessary.
Let me just hop right back to my notes here. All right.
Where did you shoot the fire? Sorry.
No, go ahead.
So we shot that at Sandy Beach side.
Okay.
So we went there, and it's funny because the fire knife dancers are all professionals, world champions. And they're like, hey, we do luau's every evening. That's our bread and butter. So if you want to do this, it's early morning. And I was like, oh, man. Okay, so we had like a 2 a.m. call time. And then we were like chasing the light. Dark, essentially, chasing the dark. And it's very easy going the other way. If you start at sunset, it's like, hey, we're going to finish at 11 p.m., all's good. This one was like, by 6 a.m., it's too bright. And so we were really like chasing that darkness. And so starting our first day, 2 a.m., new cameras, a lot of gear, that was a very difficult morning. But I'm very happy with the content we got.
Very nice. I wanted to jump to the lenses for a bit. So we kind of hit on the 24 to 105 over here. F2.8 it's pretty crazy. It kind of speaks for itself. I think everyone knows the benefits. We have over here though in the front the 35 millimeter.
It's a great lens.
Yeah, I had some real fun with this because this one felt like I thought this was almost the fastest of the autofocusing. I don't know if there's anything under the hood that makes that possible. I guess what's the thought process behind these? Because I know that Canon has dubbed these hybrid, but the aperture is always declicked, which I think is very interesting here. In general, are we possibly going to see more of these?
I mean, I hope so.
I hope so too, because I'm a little confused.
Yeah.
I think optically they look fantastic, but where do they sit, like versus the L line?
Yeah, definitely. And I think you can see that, like you said, the hybrid's the key term.
Right.
Right. Definitely, like, it's kind of, you can see it's kind of like the offspring from this being the first really in that series of those hybrid style lenses, this 24 to 105. Moving on to that, the 35 millimeter 1.4 was kind of a familiar lens for a lot of Canon people in both EF and RF, right? So I can kind of think, I can whether to guess where we might go if we stuck in the Prime series with that. But I think it's just to give more options, right?
Right.
You're going to have your L series lenses, right? You're going to have those, and they're going to be incredible for your still photographers. They're going to work great for video, but they're going to be mainly focused on those still photographers. We're going to give you some lenses that are going to, be a little bit kind of push like, hey, video guys, you got a little bit something here too, but also very good for your still people as well. Yep. So I think that's what it's about. It's just about kind of spreading the love, right? Creating more lenses, more options for lenses, and not just sticking in one like series. So.
Absolutely.
Gotcha.
The 24 EF 1.4 is my all-time favorite lens. So waiting for that to kind of come on the RF, just make a note of that.
All right.
Thank you.
Before we forget about it, really, we haven't touched too much on the C400 here. I know the C80 is kind of stealing the spotlight today, but I haven't frequently used one of the larger Cinema EOS bodies since the original C300 days, actually. And it's really interesting kind of getting back to it with this camera when we did the video, because the modularity, it's all still there, but it's changed a lot in ways. What's some of the design decisions, I guess, that went into here? One of them that comes to me at least is USB-C across the board.
Sure. Yeah. When we're talking about this 400, I mean, I think really the big thing is that you remember the 300s, you remember the 5, everything like that. It's definitely changed a lot. They used to be tall, like kind of tall cameras.
Yeah, it's definitely more compact than I expected it to be.
Yeah, and things are kind of squishing, more of the box shape. And I feel like in general, the industry is kind of moving towards that kind of box shape type camera, right? And it's about one of the things you got to think about when you start shrinking these cameras and making them smaller cubes is how do you fit everything in that body that needs to people want to be fit. Before we were using those proprietary Hiroshi style connectors for our LCD screen and our hand grip and everything like that. And now just, moving to USB is kind of a choice that not only it makes it easier for people to get replacements, it makes it easier for third-party companies to create, different lengths. Just gives people more options and more versatility for how to manage their cables. And that's one of the big things. And also because now that USB has the power, the capability to do the data and the power and all the across that connector, I think you're going to see a lot more accessories moving more towards these versatile connectors down the line. So I think that's number one there. And again, on the C400, we've crammed a lot of I/O into it.
I noticed. I noticed.
And I think that's one of the big things that you're going to see. The differentiation between these two cameras is going to be the I/O. Your I/O needs is going to really determine which direction you go in.
Well, I think that's one of the more interesting parts, because I can absolutely understand why some people may, at surface level, not understand the differences. But when you look at the use cases, especially when it comes to installation, or I guess more exotic setups that you, maybe like a larger drone, for example, that you would want to be able to strip down the camera the way that you can with a 400.
Yeah.
Even though it may weigh a little bit more, but it's less encumbered by things like the built-in handle.
Pretty close. I mean, it's when you strip it all down, it gets pretty close. So it's again, like you said, it's going to be kind of this use case where you look at it and be like, return video is really important to me. Genlock is really important to me. Those kind of things, and so multiple options across the board. Obviously, the C80, the C70 has a really kind of widespread following, and people have used that quite a bit. They know which gimbals can go on, and the C80 doesn't change that. So many different avenues that you can go here with your options, but knowing that you're your image is not going to be compromised between the two cameras. So I think is really important.
So I apparently got a question, which was how was our experience with mixed lighting with the C80 at the motorcycle shop? So for those who haven't seen it, it just came out a few hours ago. We put our own first look video on the C80. We got the chance to shoot in a motorcycle shop, which was really cool because there's tons of texture. There is mixed lighting going on, which I'll talk about in a sec. But yeah, you get texture, you get like a lot of shine, specular highlights that you would, I imagine it's kind of a similar situation with the Fire, where you're getting a lot of those very, very peak highlights that you want to preserve. Honestly, yes, we preserved everything. We shot almost all of it raw, and the flexibility, being able to adjust exposure like that in post is really profound, because it also gives you kind of an appreciation for just how much range you really have if you were to not shoot it raw.
Right.
And it's funny because it almost teaches you how to expose better after the fact. But the detail, the level of detail is wild in some of the shots, just down to like what looks like speckling of rust. I think the overall mixed lighting was handled way better than I would expect it to be. We shot a little bit of C-Log 2 as well, which is our standard log that we usually go with. And even that held a lot of flexibility, where we were able to dial in like certain highlight values just to counter some of the mixed lighting that was going on. Overall, it's a really flexible image. Obviously, it's not as flexible as RAW, but it gets you really close.
Absolutely.
Being able to push it into almost surreal territories. I think that's our last question, though. So I guess before we wrap things up, any last words, your experience with the C80? And I guess did this hit all the marks and more?
Yeah, it was incredible. It was definitely a step up for me from that R5, R3, which I love. And being able to take it to a dedicated cinema camera, this was that next step. Absolutely necessary. EOS Cinema C80 was just gorgeous. And being able to have that autofocus, which I'm so comfortable with, on the R5 and the R3, and then having it in there, it wasn't a full manual camera. And we were able to use it in manual. We used the CNRs and the Sumiri primes and the CNEs, and it was great when we used it in that way. But to be able to have that autofocus in that, unreal.
One minor note with that, I'm sure you took advantage of this. The autofocus, like assisting to do manual focus to line things up perfectly.
Yes.
That changes
next level.
Yeah.
Yes, we talked about that prior and learned a lot, but yes, I'm excited to incorporate that more.
Yeah. What's your next project, you think?
The next project, hopefully with the C80 soon. Cool. Have some stuff in the next few weeks, and looking forward to it. All stuff in the pool in the ocean, and getting in the water, getting back into Hawaii.
Nice.
I'm jealous.
Nice.
The summer's over here, but it never ends there, does it?
No, never ends. Fortunate.
Paul, any last words about the C80, C400?
Yeah, for the C70 was a fun camera, right? It was like a fun camera to use.
Absolutely.
This is a super fun camera. And I don't really honestly, I am so excited to get this and to play around with it and just have fun with this camera. It gives me everything that I wanted out of this C70. And so I just think people are going to have a blast using this thing.
Cool.
Yeah.
Do you think it hit all the requests that you were probably getting over the years?
I mean, you never hit all the requests.
There is no end.
Never.
I know.
You can never do it. But I think a lot of people are going to be very, very happy.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
so,
agreed.
Yeah.
I will just say we are shooting with C70s here, so we love the C70. It is fun, as you said.
Yeah.
So very familiar with the camera. I'm glad to see how it's evolved into this. And I was truly surprised to see that it is now full frame. So really great to see all the additions. All right.
Absolutely.
Thank you both
for
your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome chatting. So my name is Doug with B&H. This has been our time with the Canon Cinema EOS C80, C400. All these lenses here, 24-105, f2.8L, 35 VCM. The list goes on. So thank you again for joining us. Check out our video from earlier today where we gave a full in-depth look at the C80, and we also have one on the C400, so check that out as well. Until next time,